She sat at that table with a practiced smile and told my son that I was the reason his business failed. And every person in that room believed her, until I opened my laptop. For 3 years, I watched my daughter-in-law Vanessa chip away at my son's confidence, isolate him from his family, and spend money she couldn't account for. I kept quiet because Marcus asked me to, because I loved him enough to wait. But the night she laid those divorce papers on the table and pointed her finger at me, something shifted. I'd been doing my homework, quietly, patiently, the way only a mother who has nothing left to lose can do. What happened next in that dining room changed everything, for Marcus, for Vanessa, and for the woman everyone had written off as just another interfering mother-in-law. This is a story about patience, betrayal, and what it really means to protect the people you love. It's about the moment a quiet woman becomes someone no one ever saw coming. Sparkles stay until the very end. The final twist will leave you speechless. Speech balloon, tell me where you're watching from, and what you would have done in my place. Thumbs up, like and subscribe for new episodes every week, where family betrayal always meets its truth. Sparkling heart, want to support these stories? Send a super thanks. Every bit helps bring justice to life. Full transcript. She called me a burden. She said it in front of my son, her lawyer, and 6 people who used to invite me to Christmas dinner. She said I was the reason Marcus's construction company collapsed. She said I'd interfered, undermined, and sabotaged everything he'd built. And then she slid the divorce papers across the polished dining room table with a smile so practiced it almost looked real. What Vanessa didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I'd spent 8 months quietly pulling on every thread she'd left behind. So when she finished talking, I reached into my bag, set my laptop on the table, and opened it. The room went silent the second they saw that screen. $2.3 million. Transferred. By her. My name is Carol Delaney. I'm 63 years old. And this is the story of how I almost lost my son to a woman who was very, very good at being believed. Marcus was 34 when he met Vanessa Holt at a real estate conference in Houston. He called me that same night, which he hadn't done after a first date since he was 22. "Mom," he said, and I could hear it immediately, that particular brightness in his voice that only meant one thing. "I think I just met someone different." I was happy for him. Genuinely, completely happy. Marcus had given everything to building Delaney Construction for 7 years. He worked 16-hour days, drove a truck with a cracked windshield he never got fixed, and ate dinner standing over his kitchen counter more nights than not. He deserved someone to come home to. I met Vanessa 6 weeks later at a Sunday lunch Marcus hosted at his apartment. She was 31, beautiful in a precise, deliberate way, not a hair or word out of place. She brought flowers, asked thoughtful questions, laughed at the right moments. And she watched me. Not in an obvious way, in the way a person watches something they're deciding what to do with. I told myself I was being unfair, protective in the way that embarrasses your children. I smiled and passed the bread and told her it was wonderful to meet her. But I drove home that evening with a feeling I couldn't shake, the kind that sits in your chest like a swallowed stone. They were engaged 11 months later. Married 6 months after that. The changes were subtle at first. The way I know they always are. Marcus started missing our Sunday calls. Not every week, just often enough that I started to notice. When I asked if everything was okay, he'd say Vanessa had plans. Or they'd had a long week. Or he'd call me Monday instead. Monday calls became Tuesday. Tuesday became whenever he could find a minute. My daughter Renata, Marcus's younger sister, noticed it too. "She doesn't like us," Renata told me over coffee one afternoon. "Blunt the way she's always been. She's pleasant enough, but she's working on him. I can feel it." I told Renata to give it time. I gave it time. The first real warning came 18 months into the marriage. Marcus called me on a Tuesday morning, unexpected, and his voice had a tightness I recognized from when he was a teenager dealing with something he didn't know how to say. "Mom, Vanessa thinks it might be better if we scaled back our visits for a while." I kept my voice steady. "Scaled back how?" "Maybe just holidays. She says she feels like there's always tension. And she needs home to feel like a safe space." Safe space. I recognized the language. I'd read enough to recognize it. I told him I understood. I told him I loved him. And I sat in my kitchen for a very long time after we hung up, thinking about how to be patient in a way that didn't cost me my son. What I didn't know then, what I was only beginning to piece together, was that Vanessa hadn't just been working on our relationship. She'd been working on his business. Delaney Construction had grown steadily through Marcus's 20s. By the time he married Vanessa, the company had 12 full-time employees, solid contracts with 2 commercial developers in Dallas, and a reputation that Marcus had built entirely on showing up when he said he would and doing what he promised. He wasn't wealthy, but he was building something real. Vanessa came with a background in business finance, or so she said. She'd worked at a private equity firm before transitioning to real estate consulting. She had credentials, contacts, and a confidence about money that made Marcus trust her completely. Within a year of the wedding, she'd positioned herself as the company's financial manager. Marcus told me it made sense. "She knows this stuff, Mom, way better than I do. And it saves us the cost of a CFO." I didn't push back. I didn't have grounds to. Not yet. But I started paying attention. The calls that reached me filtered through Renata. Marcus was working longer hours than ever. 2 of his senior subcontractors had walked. A major contract with a hotel developer had fallen through at the last minute under circumstances nobody could fully explain. When I asked Marcus about the hotel contract, he said it was just bad timing. Vanessa had handled the negotiations. And she'd done her best. Bad timing. 3 more contracts stalled over the next year. Then Marcus had to let 4 employees go. Then 8. He stopped talking about the business on our, by now very infrequent, calls. When I asked, he'd say it was fine. Adjusting. The market was tough. Vanessa, meanwhile, had bought herself a new car. Had the kitchen of their home in Frisco completely renovated. Took a solo, wellness trip to Scottsdale that Marcus mentioned in passing with a careful neutrality that told me everything. That was when I started doing my homework. I want to be careful about how I describe this, because I know how it sounds. A suspicious mother-in-law, digging for dirt. But that's not what this was. This was a woman who had watched her son build something with his hands for a decade, and who could see, clearly, unmistakably, that it was being taken apart from the inside. I had a friend, Diane, who'd spent 30 years as a forensic accountant before she retired. We met in a church choir in 2019 and had become genuinely close. I called her on a Thursday night and told her everything I knew. "I'm not asking you to do anything illegal," I said. "I just need to know if what I'm seeing is real." Diane asked me for 6 weeks. She came back to me in 4. What she found, based only on publicly available business filings, tax records, and information I had legitimate access to as a person Marcus had named on several company documents years earlier, was a pattern. Vendor payments that didn't match any vendor Marcus had ever used. Consulting invoices from a company that didn't appear to exist. Transfer records between the business operating account and a personal account that was not Marcus's. Not all of it was verifiable from the outside. But enough of it was. Diane printed everything, organized it, and sat across from me at my kitchen table and said, very quietly, "Carol, your daughter-in-law has been siphoning money from that business for at least 2 years." I didn't cry. I'd already cried. I'd cried in the months before, when I was still hoping I was wrong. Now I was just ready. I brought everything to a family law and financial fraud attorney named Patrick Mercer. who a colleague of Diane's had recommended. He reviewed the documents for 2 weeks, had his own forensic contact verify the patterns, and called me on a Friday morning. "Mrs. Delaney," he said, "this is real, and if your son wants to pursue this, he has a case." The question was getting the information to Marcus. I'd tried 3 times over the previous months to raise concerns. Each time, Marcus had gotten defensive, then apologetic, then distant. Vanessa had clearly done thorough work on how he perceived me. Overprotective. Interfering. Unable to let her son grow up. I needed him to see it himself. Not because I told him. The opportunity came from a direction I didn't expect. Marcus called me on a Wednesday, actually called. Not a text, and I could hear it immediately. That tightness. That particular quality of a person who has finally reached the thing they've been circling for a very long time. "Mom," he said, "Vanessa wants a divorce." I kept very still. "She says the marriage is broken. She says she's tried everything. She says," he stopped. Then, quietly, "she says it's partly because of you. That you've never accepted her. That you've been trying to undermine her from the start." There it was. The thing Vanessa had been building toward. Not just the divorce, but the story that came with it. The story where she walked away with whatever she'd accumulated. And I was the reason for all of it. "Marcus," I said carefully, "I need you to do one thing for me before any paperwork gets signed. I need you to have dinner with me. At your house. With Vanessa there. And I need you to let me say what I have to say." He was quiet for a long time. "Why?" he asked. "Because I'm your mother," I said, "and I have never lied to you. Not once. Not ever." He agreed. I don't know what Vanessa expected from that dinner. Maybe an emotional appeal. Maybe tears and pleading. Maybe the kind of scene she could use afterward to confirm everything she'd been saying about me. She'd invited people. That surprised me when I arrived. Her sister Brooke was there. Their mutual friend couple, the Garcias. Vanessa's attorney, a sharp-looking woman named Dana who sat at the end of the table with a legal pad, and Renata, my own daughter, who Vanessa had apparently called and invited. Presumably counting on Renata to be a neutral party. Renata caught my eye when I walked in and gave me a look I'd known since she was 4 years old. The look that meant, "I'm with you." Marcus sat at the head of the table looking like a man who hadn't slept in a week. Which, I would learn later, he hadn't. Vanessa sat to his right. Composed as always, wearing a cream silk blouse and the expression of a woman who has already decided how the evening ends. She spoke first. Of course she did. "I want to be honest. Since we're all here," she said, her voice measured and reasonable. "I've tried for 3 years to build a marriage with Marcus. And for 3 years, there has been a constant source of interference and negativity that has made that impossible." She looked directly at me. "Carol has never accepted me. She has questioned every decision I've made, undermined Marcus's confidence in me, and inserted herself into our finances and our business in ways that were damaging and inappropriate." She paused for effect. "The truth is, Delaney Construction's difficulties over the last 2 years are a direct result of the instability she created in our marriage. When your home isn't stable, your business isn't stable. Marcus knows this. I think everyone in this room knows this." She slid the divorce papers across the table. Everyone was looking at Marcus, waiting to see how he'd respond. And then they were looking at me. I reached into my bag. I set my laptop on the table. I opened it. "Vanessa," I said, keeping my voice very calm. "You're right that I've been involved in this situation. More than you realized." I turned the laptop so the screen faced the room. "This is the business operating account for Delaney Construction," I said, "and these are 18 months of transfer records to an account that Marcus has no knowledge of and no access to." I let that land. $2.3 million, I said. Moved in increments small enough not to trigger automatic review. disguised as vendor payments and consulting fees to a company that a certified forensic accountant has confirmed does not exist. The room was completely silent. Vanessa's expression didn't change for exactly 2 seconds. And then it did. Just slightly. Just enough. Her attorney Dana sat up very straight and set down her pen. "That's," Vanessa started. "I have documentation going back 22 months. I continued. Organized by date, by amount, and by the account they were transferred to. The account, incidentally, is registered to a Vanessa Marie Holt, which is the name on Vanessa's pre-marriage identification, not the name she uses now." I looked at her. "I also have records of the Scottsdale property," I said quietly. "The one you purchased 14 months ago. Cash sale. $840,000. Marcus had gone completely still. "Mom," he said, and his voice had changed entirely. "I'm sorry I couldn't tell you sooner," I said, and I meant it with every part of myself. "I needed to be certain before I brought this to you, and I needed it to be something you could see with your own eyes, not just take my word for." Vanessa stood up from the table. "This is ridiculous," she said, and her voice had finally lost that careful control. "These records are taken out of context. Carol has no idea what she's looking at. Those were legitimate business expenses that I—" "Dana." Marcus said his wife's attorney's name quietly. "Just that." Dana looked at the screen for a long moment, then looked at Vanessa. "Vanessa," Dana said carefully, "I think we should pause this conversation." Brooke, Vanessa's sister, pushed back from the table. "Vanessa, what is she talking about? What Scottsdale property?" "There's nothing to." "The forensic accountant's full report is also on this laptop," I said, "as are his contact details, credentials, and a signed affidavit confirming his findings. Everything here is available to anyone who wants to review it tonight, including Marcus's attorney, who I've already been in contact with." Marcus was looking at me. Really looking at me, in the way he hadn't in years. "You did all of this," he said slowly. "By yourself?" "With help from Diane," I said. "You've met Diane. From my choir. She's a retired forensic accountant." Something moved across his face that I hadn't seen there in a very long time. Vanessa made one more attempt. She straightened her shoulders and turned to the room with that practiced composure, and I could see her trying to find the version of this story where she still controlled the narrative. "Marcus," she said softly, "you know me. You know I've given everything to this marriage and to that business. Whatever your mother thinks she's found." "Stop." Marcus's voice was very quiet. Not loud, not angry, not yet. Just final. "I think you should go," he said. Vanessa left. Dana followed her, already on her phone. The Garcias made quiet excuses and slipped out behind them. Brooke stayed, sitting at the table looking stunned. The way people look when they realize they've been used as props in someone else's story. The four of us, Marcus, Renata, Brooke, and I, stayed at that table for 3 more hours. Marcus asked me to walk him through everything. From the beginning. Every moment I'd gotten suspicious. Every thread I'd followed. Every piece of paper Diane had reviewed. I told him all of it. He asked questions calmly, methodically, the way he approaches a structural problem on a job site. That's always been Marcus, even in pain. He stays focused on the problem. At some point he put his head in his hands and sat that way for a long minute without speaking. "I believed her," he said finally. "About you. I actually believed her." "She was very good at it," I said gently. "And she started early, before you had any reason to doubt her. That's how it works." "I missed almost 2 years with you," he said. 2 years of Sundays." "We have a lot of Sundays ahead of us," I said. He looked at me then with those eyes I'd known since the first second of his life. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said. "You don't need to be," I told him. "You were doing what people do when they love someone. You trusted her. That's not a fault." The legal process took 8 months. Patrick Mercer was thorough and relentless. And the forensic evidence Diane had helped assemble was solid enough that Vanessa's attorneys eventually stopped fighting and started negotiating. The Scottsdale property was located and frozen as an asset. The offshore account, because yes, there was an offshore account that the deeper investigation uncovered, was identified and subject to recovery proceedings. A criminal fraud referral was made, though I won't speak to where that ultimately landed. What I can tell you is that Delaney Construction is still standing. It's smaller than it was at its peak, and Marcus spent a hard year rebuilding relationships with contractors and clients who'd lost confidence. But it's standing. And it's his. He hired a proper CFO. He laughed when he told me that. Should have done it 5 years ago. Right? Live and learn, I said. The Sunday dinners came back. Not immediately. We both needed a little time to find our rhythm again after everything. But by spring, Marcus was showing up at my door on Sunday afternoons the way he had when he was in his 20s. Sometimes with Renata, sometimes alone, always with that particular ease that told me we were okay. Renata's husband grills. Marcus brings the pie. I make the thing I always make. The brisket that takes 11 hours and has been in my family since before I was born. And we sit at the table that has held this family together through everything. And we talk. And we laugh. And sometimes we sit quietly. And all of it feels like exactly what it is. Enough. More than enough. Diane came to one of those Sunday dinners in the fall. Marcus hugged her for a long time and called her his guardian angel. And she laughed and told him to stop or she'd start charging him for her services. Afterward, sitting on my back porch while the others cleaned up inside, Diane asked me the question I'd been asking myself for months. Do you feel vindicated? I thought about it for a real minute. No, I said finally. I don't think vindication is the right word. I feel like my son is safe. And that's all I ever wanted. Diane nodded. That's better than vindication, she said. She's right. It is. People ask me sometimes what I'd say to mothers in similar situations. Women who can see something happening to their child and don't know how to reach them. I'd say this. Stay. Don't disappear just because they've been convinced to push you away. Be patient in a way that preserves your dignity and theirs. Don't let your fear make you loud when the moment calls for quiet. And do your homework. Because the truth is patient too. It just needs someone willing to sit with it long enough to let it surface. I'm 63 years old. I have Sunday dinners and an 11-hour brisket and a son who calls me now. Not because he thinks he should, but because he wants to. That's everything. That has always been everything. And that was just the beginning.